Stinson, a recent graduate of this fine university, George Mason. Recently graduated, thank you. Recently graduated with my environmental public policy degree, and now I'm currently working as an environmental consultant at the Cadmus Group, working with the EPA and the Energy Star program. So we're going to start the discussion. I'm going to keep it pretty casual. So if you guys have anything that you want to add, I'm going to ask some pointed questions to each of you, and then we'll kind of you can just add your insight as we go. But I'll give a brief introduction to each of our panelists here, although I think you guys each have a little mini biography, except for our first panelist. He just kind of snuck up on stage here. I think he just has a lot of insight that he needs to share with us. But our first panelist is one of my favorite professors from Mason, the brilliant, inspiring, and passionate Dr. Dann Sklarew. Dr. Dann co-authored Mason's Climate Action Plan, and he concentrates his research on advancing ecological stewardship, sustainability science, and sustainable development. And he's also the principal investigator for more than 800,000 in externally funded contracts and grants. So thank you so much for coming up here, Dr. Dann. And then next we have Olivia and Carter Ries, who are just 11 and a half and 13, but they have already founded their own nonprofit, One More Generation, or OMG. And they help educate kids and adults about endangered species so we can keep these animals around for one more generation, or hopefully many more. And then we have, thanks so much, guys. And then we have the previously introduced Tim Damon, who is the U.S. Youth Delegate to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And he recently earned his master's in climate change and international development, and now he's currently working on a novel about the climate challenges facing youth today. So thank you for coming up here again. All right, and finally, we have Scott Ankeny, who is the founder of Going Green Today, which is an online tool that can give you personalized coaching on how to save over $2,000 on your cost of living just by going green, which I think is something that we could all benefit from. So thanks so much, Scott. All right, so let's see if we can come up with any alternative plans. I have a feeling that these guys might be able to come up with something, but all right, so let's start with Tim. So one of the main arguments against sustainability is that many green actions aren't profitable or they're just too expensive. So how can our economic philosophies shift such that sustainability is proven to be profitable and worth the cost?
Is this on?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, that's quite the question, and I would first push back in more of a broad fashion against the idea of profitability and the profit motive as the only driving influence in our decision making. But that maybe could be an area where someone would have a question for me, and I could talk about what's misleading about profit as a notion, but it absolutely is a very dominant narrative, and I've personally come across a lot of instances where all someone wants to talk about is the economy or the economic implications of a policy or an idea. And I actually focused in sort of a way to find a response to this barrier that I was running up against. I focused my master's dissertation on the ethics and economics of climate change from a youth perspective, and that relates again to intergenerational equity. And so rather than proposing an alternative plan, the answer to this question is going to get us at what kind of alternative way of thinking or paradigm shift do we need in order to help us see and implement these alternative plans, and specifically sustainability in this case. And this gets into what is a very technical discussion or concept in econometrics, which I'll try to keep as simple as possible, and you can ask me more pointed questions if you want more of the details. But economists compare the costs of policies and cost-benefit analysis. And I'll take as a specific example mitigation of climate change. We have to pay, as I said, for mitigation today. The benefits will mostly come later, those of us who live that long in future generations. And then instead of, you pay the cost now, and we get the benefits of not mitigating climate change, or rather the benefits of continuing in the short term on business as usual by expending those future costs. So we defer the costs of our actions to the future. So economists use what's called discounting as a way to deal with what do you have when there's a situation where the costs and benefits of a policy are occurring over a long period of time. And what I essentially argued as the thrust of my thesis was economists should not really be applying a discount rate, or at least not as high as what they are, because it's inconsistent with sustainability. Because discounting, and I have a graph, if my PowerPoint is available, it would be illustrative to have just one graph that would help. I promise, only one graph. And
Is it?
I'll keep talking in the meantime. It's not vital to have the graph, but there it is. I saw it down there.
Oh, that's what I was asking, yeah.
The green one there.
Yep.
It's a, yeah. All right, so if we can go to page 2, it may be difficult to see, but you've got 4 different colored lines there, and I apologize if anyone is colorblind because that would include several of the colors of my lines. But in terms of what is this impact of discounting, you can see that it's going to help me to stand up. On this axis, you have the value as a percentage of something that's happening in the future compared to today. So if we said, what's its value today? That would be as a percentage here. And then going across, you have how many years away we are from the present. And so sustainability would say we should be concerned with what's happening 50 years from now, 100 years from now. But when economists would apply a pretty typical discount rate, you're going to see that instead of counting 100% of what's happening in the future, they count some lesser degree of it. And so if you're looking just at something 50 years away, which I hope to still be alive in 50 years, many of us will still be, we're only looking 14% at what's going on then in terms of our values. So when you're considering how quickly should we respond to climate change, how rapidly should we mitigate, and you run up against discounting, it biases everything against an ambitious response to climate change. And even before I did any work on this area, Nicholas Stern did his pretty famous review on the economics of climate change, and he used a lower discount rate, reflected in orange here. And when you get out to 100 years, his analysis was putting more than 12 and a half times as much value on the future as we are in a normal discounting scenario. So if we really care about sustainability and intergenerational equity, we should be using something that's at least here, but theoretically would be equivalent. Because just because we're the ones alive today getting to make the decisions about what we do doesn't mean that the people in the future are worth any less. And that will be the present day that they experience, and the retirement that many of us will hope to experience. And so there's this gap in our ability to have long-range thinking, and it stems from the way economists apply discounting in their mathematics. So if we really want to be fairly comparing the costs and benefits of our actions and guiding our social policy, if we really want to implement sustainability in more than just rhetoric, but actually put our money where our mouth is, then we need to talk about discounting. And who better to talk about discounting than young people? Because we have this special moral voice and moral authority, because it's our future that's being discounted, and we're the ones being largely cut out of the decision-making process that will determine what that future is. So I like to highlight this, particularly to young people, to get it on their radar, because unless you've studied a good bit of economics in college, you're not really going to be intimately familiar with discounting or why it's done. And I'm happy if there are questions to get into more of an explanation about it. But I've tried to keep this as quick and simple as possible. And hopefully I've also answered the question, how would we truly go about a paradigm shift as an alternative plan for the future about sustainability and making it seem, realizing that it truly is profitable rather than discounting everything that we would have to gain from it.
All right, so does anyone in our panel have anything to add? So we'll go to the audience at the end, but thanks so much, Tim. Okay, so Dr. Dan, I have a question for you. So you've had many experiences across many facets of the environmental movement. In your opinion, what are the most important systematic issues that we have to tackle, and how do we go about that?
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia.
Really, thank you.
She's good.
Sorry, just first a call out to all those Arlington County students there. My kids are one of them. Anyone here from Arlington County, Virginia? All right, way to go, guys. Okay, so I had to call out my own count here. And Joe, you count too, since you were there when you were a kid, right? Okay, great. Yeah, I think systematically, one of the biggest challenges we're having is with kind of getting our heads around the idea that economy doesn't have to be out producing more and more things. And we could dematerialize our economy. We can think about what sorts of value can we create without using more resources or wasting resources or turning resources into waste, and try to create a global economy where we're valuing things that bring needs to it, that meet our needs, not just air, water, food, but also the needs like love and self-actualization, creative expression, and really be able to value those. I mean, I think, for example, about church. You pay a lot of money, perhaps, to be able to belong to a church. There isn't an immediate material benefit from that. Maybe there was in the afterlife, but you're willing to put money into that value. Similarly, for dance lessons or things like that. So there's lots of opportunities where we could take and think about alternative ways to create value. We can be, of course, doing our reduce, recycle, reuse type things. We can be upcycling things, taking waste and turning it back into resources like companies like TerraCycle do. And finally, we can be creating an environment in which consumption isn't the purpose in life, but instead it's an aspect of meeting our needs. So I think that would be a general approach.
Right. And what about possibly adding sustainability into another factor of our economy? So actually having that as a factor when we're looking at the economy as a whole.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. We were talking about that before lunch break, that just being able to bring sustainability in all its aspects, from the planet to the prosperity to the people, and that on the planet side we heard about the planetary boundaries we're trying to impact. So that's one aspect of what we have to negotiate in the so-called triple bottom line. Right. The second is the prosperity, not just the overall prosperity. I mean, we had a GDP last year of $74 trillion, of which 20% of that came from the United States. But when you look at it, we had the GDP per capita, how much money were produced per person in the population. In the United States, it was multiples of that of some place like India, for example, which means we're dealing with that second thing. And then, of course, the third thing is just those basic human needs. And I want to think about the future generations, but I also want to think about the generations here today. Here at George Mason, we have people who are dealing with food insecurity and shelter insecurity. And so we don't want to discount the future, as we were talking about before, but also we can't invest so much in the future that we're losing track of the present. So it's really a pretty tricky challenge there to realize sustainability.
All right, thank you. Sure. All right. All right, and a nice transition. So the future is now. So we have Olivia and Carter here. And I have a question for you guys. So what do we all need to do differently to solve the growing problems related to climate change and mass extinction?
Well, the first thing is to admit that climate change is real and that we are the cause of it. And second, we need to educate ourselves and other people that we can reduce our carbon depensity, I think that's how you say it, to help solve climate change.
Yeah, do you have anything to add, Carter?
No.
His sister's got it. Thanks, guys. All right, Scott, I haven't forgotten about you all the way on the end there. So how can individual changes have a collective impact on the entire community?
It's a good question, and it's one that's it's hard to chain how my individual actions ultimately lead to a global solution like global warming, right, or a global problem like global warming, and how my individual lifestyle is, triggering the environmental freefall that we're currently experiencing on so many different levels, and we're talking about it all this day. It's really about a ripple effect, right? Like when an individual starts to understand some of the foundations of sustainable thinking, we start to grasp the ideas of embodied energy, upstream, downstream, that this pen that I'm holding today, represented a certain amount of resources, materials, and energy to get to me. And then I use it and I discard it fairly quickly. And so, one of the, we've developed a platform that works to, kind of hook into someone's interest in saving money out of their life, right? Save $2,000 off your cost of living. But through their 90-day coaching plan, we're starting to instill those foundations, those new ideas of sustainable thinking. When it comes down to what's sort of the easiest, simplest way, that was sort of the driving question. Or how can we connect our individual impact to collective action? It's really, I think what we need to do, it's a distributed solution in a way, because what we're looking at doing across the across our problem right now is we have policy, we have industry, but when we're talking about a free market, which is really where individuals come to play, we're the ones that are going to be voting with our dollars. We're the ones that when we start voting with our dollars and making ethical choices on our consumption, for the one product that might be higher carbon intensity than another one with, maybe a better disposal process behind it, that's going to be seen through industry. We often act as if we don't really have any personal power for these solutions, and yet where I come from and where I stand, we have all the power. And connecting that into a cohesive unity, into a cohesive movement, is something that maybe we'll get into later on in the conversation.
Yeah.
I was so glad you walked right into my prop trap. So I just wanted to show, when we're talking about solutions, this is a pen we have made of recycled cardboard and fast-growing bamboo clips. And a lot of these students at Mason, I know, have these, others. But this is one example of the kinds of options that are available to us. And I noticed several people today are walking around with the bottle-to-pen, recycled bottle pens. And so the idea that a pen is a disposable commodity is changing as quickly as so many other things. And I really feel lucky to be alive in the 2010s in the sense that we are starting to have options like this great vegan food, woohoo, that we had today. This is one of the first conference I've ever been to that has had only vegan options, which is awesome, and it tastes good too. So I think it's really important to emphasize that, as John Dernbeck and others have said about enacting as if tomorrow matters, that essentially we need these options, and that then we have to take the responsibility to follow through with our habits and changing them to meet the new options that are becoming available.
So is that pen made out of plastic bottle?
That is correct.
Well, what happens after that pen is thrown away?
Well, I wouldn't throw it away, actually. I would take out the parts that can't be recycled, and I put this right back into my Arlington County recycling bin so that it could be part of another can or bottle or pen in the future.
Okay.
Hopefully.
And where do you buy those?
Where do you buy them?
I just saw it. I don't remember, at a 7-Eleven or something. Like, I got to get one of those. But the URL is on the side here. I left the sticker. I think it's B2P, bottle to pen. Try that, Googling that, or I'll put a tweet to the site after our panel today, so you can find it there at Dann Sklarew.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. I got another one for Tim. So how can we change our mindsets to be more conscious of the real value of things? And how can this mindset shift lead us towards a paradigm shift?
Wow, the real value of things.
Yeah.
That's an extremely difficult and comprehensive question. Partly it is going to deal with what I just talked about in regard to the way we allow for time in our decision making and deciding maybe we want to assert more of a value about our future. We don't just want a good living now, we want it in 30 years. But it's way broader than that, and it needs to be part of a much bigger shift. What is the real value? You know, is it going to be economic growth in a material sense? Or is it going to be personal fulfillment? Is it going to be happiness? You know, it's been suggested we could have, instead of GDP, we would have this global domestic happiness as a possible alternative. And we need to get creative and think outside of the box in that regard, but we all ultimately also have the answer, because I believe we must all have the capacity to figure out what is truly important to us. And is that more dollars, or is it more happiness, or is it feeling more enriched and fulfilled in your life and the work that you have? So I'm going to also pose that question out if there are any ideas or comments in the audience or my fellow panelists. What are the things we really do care about and want to value? And then I think that will give us a way forward to think about how do we implement the systems that will let us value them.
Yeah, and I always kind of see, like, in our current economic state, we'll get something for, $5 or something, but it's not taking in, like, all the externalities. It's not taking into account the resources that were put into it. So that's a possible lack of connection that we have in our current economy. Does anyone have anything to add? All right. Let's see, we're like zooming through these questions. I'll have plenty of time for some Q&A. Let's see. All right, another one for Olivia and or Carter. So you have a program that actually teaches about pre-cycling. Touched a little bit on that. Can you explain that? Or, and also, can little changes like pre-cycling make a big difference?
I'm going to stand up. I can't sit down anymore.
Yeah. All right, good.
So pre-cycling isn't a little change, it's pretty big. We teach kids about pre-cycling, which is you go to the store and you buy plastics that can be recycled instead of plastics that cannot. The three numbers, if you look on the bottom of a plastic bottle, it'll have 3 arrows and like a number inside, it'd be a 1. But if you see 3, 6, or 7, those usually aren't bought by people at the recycling center. They'll take it in, but it goes straight to the landfill. So we teach kids about pre-cycling, which is go to the store and, like you said, vote with your wallet. And so, yes, pre-cycling can make a big change instantly. If we can get all these people to pre-cycle, then we can make a huge impact on the market and on the environment.
Wow.
I would just add, for those in Northern Virginia, that will actually also improve your air quality, because if you're throwing things in trash, it's being burned at the waste-to-energy plant down in Lorton. So by pre-cycling and putting things into your recycling stream instead of into your waste stream, you're actually creating a healthier atmosphere for yourself.
It's also one in Alexandria, too. I live right near it.
So how did you guys get so knowledgeable by your young ages?
I just am.
He was born that way. Born that way.
Well, about the plastic, it started in the Gulf oil spill when my parents had CNN on, and I saw sea turtles and seabirds being pulled out of the water caked in oil. And that got me really upset, and I asked my dad, what are we doing about this problem? And so then he contacted agencies asking what we could do, and they said if you could bring down supplies. And so for 4 months straight, we went to churches, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, basically anywhere, and asked people for supplies. But then on my 8th birthday, we drove 11.5 hours down to the Gulf, where we spent the next 5 days working with the Marine Mammal and Sea Turtle Rescue Center. They had 146 sea turtles, 6 sharks, and 1 dolphin, which were all sick from ingesting oil. And then on our last day there, a professor from Berkeley, California, came up to us and asked us, what are we doing about the environment? And my dad got mad at her and said, what do you mean? Haven't my kids done enough? And she said, I'm just saying, it takes me 6 to 8 weeks to rehab these sea turtles. Where do you want me to put them when they're healthy again? And my dad said, back in the ocean, of course. The oil will be gone someday. And she said, oil's not my problem. Plastic pollution is. And that was the first time we had ever heard of plastic pollution. And then for the next 5 months, we started researching on plastic pollution.
Yeah.
They all made it, and they got healthy. And I just want to ask a quick question. Does anybody know how to get oil out of a sea turtle?
If it swallows it or ingests it.
Let us know.
Well, you have to squirt mayonnaise down their throat because mayonnaise is thicker than oil, and sea turtles don't like mayonnaise, so they throw it all up, and all the oil comes out.
Oh my gosh.
A syringe. Syringe, just get it down.
All right, this is truly an educational day for all of us. Awesome. Thanks, Olivia and Carter. Okay, let's see. How about one for Scott? What are the key elements to accelerating a paradigm shift? These are questions. I'm like, I didn't make them up.
Good question.
So.
There's a multifaceted answer to that. Let me just pick one or two. And speeding up our paradigm shift. I mean, I'm a big believer in the people, right? I know that technology is doing its part. 5, 10 years, 15 years from now, we're going to have solutions at play that, we can only dream of today. Policy and we'll see. Those wheels are grinding slow. But when it comes to climate change, what a person, an individual can do, coming back to the collective impact, that's how we speed up this paradigm shift. On an economic level, we have to create new economies. How we create new economies, I'm looking at a room full of individuals who are probably going to go out there and either go into the science fields or maybe start new businesses that solve a lot of our problems and ecological issues we're facing. Another way that we can speed this up, my background is behavioral economics. I've spent my career studying how to trigger people to do things that they mildly want to do, and inspiration is wanes and waxes, ebbs and flows. We're inspired one day and we're not inspired the next. And how do we keep that messaging consistent enough that we can lead people from one day to the next to the next? How do we achieve these common short-term goals? We've spent the last 7 years at Going Green Today working how to trigger social movements that'll last. And my background shows, and a lot of the study that we're doing and the solutions we have in the field shows that really when you're looking at creating a social movement, a lasting change, there's metrics that have to be achieved in order to get to that, which is why a lot of times, my big pulpit is 1/3 of your carbon footprint. I want everyone reducing 1/3 of their carbon footprint. Now, how that will speed things up is, once that starts to hit 1% of a population, 10% of a population, 30% of a population who have agreed to reduce 1/3 of their carbon footprint, certain things are at play. Policy starts going faster. We have more innovative thinking. Green people make green cities make green countries. So really, I think at the end of the day, to speed up the paradigm shift, is, here in the District of Columbia, we're trying out a pretty great social experiment right now. and it's called the Do It for DC Challenge. And it's using this platform that we've created, which is a 90-day coaching plan, save $2,000, reduce your footprint by 1/3. But what we're doing is we have a defined geographic boundary. We're trying to get a percentage of the population to hold the same ideals, beliefs, and values, and giving them a common short-term goal. And when 620,000 people achieve a 1% density in that population, you've technically started a movement. When you get to 11% of that population, you've hit the tipping point of your movement. It's a sticky, whereas that 10% will start bringing in the next 20%. So we're talking about dollars and cents in a lot of ways on how to trigger a movement. Every person that joins your movement, any movement in history, costs money. Whether it's outreach, whether it's, tools, whatever it might be, it costs money. When you start getting to that 10%, it starts kind of hitting in economies of scale. Things start moving faster. We did this, I worked in alternative medicine for a lot of my career, bringing acupuncture from this fringe idea of complementary medicine to mainstream. And this is the same thing that we've done through history on how to bring things into the mainstream. I think, like I said, it's a multifaceted answer. I'll just stop right there this time.
You have anything to add?
Sure, I'll...
Thank you.
Adding on to that, we've hit on this problem of collective action is what is needed to actually solve the big problem. How do we effectively allow individuals to contribute to and spark that collective action? And there's quite a barrier there because, as you said, it's very hard to actually trace out and connect the dots what your personal impact is. And one way of getting around that, I had experience in 2011. I interned at Earth Day Network here in DC, and they had a Billion Acts of Green campaign that they were just launching at the time. It now has over 1 billion acts that they've collected. But an act is any individual around the world can go onto their website and take a pledge of personal actions they will take in their life that will contribute to a lower footprint or more environmentally conscious behavior, et cetera. And then this act is registered and counted on their website. And so the idea here is that even just by allowing there to be more collective recognition of just how many individuals are taking action of one form or another, it's very empowering then because more people feel a sense that I'm not alone in this. Look, wow, there's over a billion other people who have signed up and taken this kind of a pledge. And if we could come up with more creative platforms and mechanisms that will help to publicize individual action and let it achieve that collective element, we can all get closer to where we're going. Otherwise, you just end up kind of frustrated as the individual and you don't know where you're going or how you're contributing.
Oh yeah, I like that. Good response. Is it okay if I jump back in?
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on. One thing that, I would say about 10 years ago, I was listening to some politicians talk about, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we have to have this happen, X, Y, and Z. And, the average person doesn't know what they're doing 6 months from now. It's just not the way, we need common short-term goals. I mean, even in our environmental field, in our environmental industry, we have, we all agree that there's a common enemy. Very rarely do we find unity that there's a common solution to that common enemy. And so what happens is we have a ton of infighting. We start making progress in a certain area, and all of a sudden you've got natural gas going after nuke, or wind going after. I mean, this is why I really believe in distributed solutions. And the way to create a common short-term goal is by really identifying what the real goal is. It's like 350's work. Identifying what the milestone, or what's mission accomplished. Is mission accomplished 350? Is mission accomplished, what is it? And then working back from creating that plan. You know, I mean, these are the things that will, you know, again, speed up the paradigm shift in the individual itself. I mean, this is really where I put a lot of my work at, you know, we call something the time, money, knowledge conundrum right now. And what that really means is, you know, on an individual level, I don't have enough time to sit down and read a book about how to green my life. It's just not going to happen. You know, the average person has a job or two, full-time curriculum, you know, if there's children in your life, you know, it's just like we're to our hilt with our time and our responsibilities. So the idea that the average person is going to push themselves through greening their life isn't going to happen. You know, and you know, as far as money goes, a lot of the belief around sustainability and green living comes to the fact that we think it's expensive. You know, and it's actually quite the opposite. I mean, truly green living, sustainable living, is keeping more resources in our wallet, keeping more resources in our planet, more resources in our cities. And, you know, this is why, like, a lot of our messaging, you know, I'm a big believer in behavioral change messaging needs to be triggered and layered together. And I think that's like a whole nother day to talk about it, but you know, we can teach someone how to save $2,000 but without spending a penny, and that's just from lifestyle choices. And you know, again, knowledge, and again, when it comes to that sort of knowledge, most of the information that people consider green is marketing agenda based and greenwashed information. Buy more, be green. That's really been the predominant message over the last, you know, 5 or 10 years, and it's just not the case. So, you know, that time, money, knowledge conundrum is really holding up an individual, and how do we make that easy for an individual to take action, and then have that action form into a collective impact in a movement, so they know, so they have social proof, so they know that they're not alone. You know, there's many ways that we can trigger that. You know, my organization has gone all online and on web for that reason, because, you know, as much as the time, money, knowledge conundrum is holding up, it's a real roadblock, because it's holding up on technology. It's holding up on every single level, and but I think that might be another question. I won't get ahead of myself.
Sure. Thank you.
One of the things that I've found in terms of influencing the systematic change is the idea of action research. And I know, Michelle, you know that well from my class, and about the 11+% of the audience here who's also participated in action research for sustainability have experienced firsthand that it's not just about making decisions, but figuring out, well, did that make a difference? So Dan, where are you in the audience? Dan Sullivan? Okay, so Dan, Dan was trying to figure out, okay, for his action research towards sustainability, can I save greenhouse gases by taking the train versus taking a plane? And if I remember this correct, just correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was about 1/7, about 14% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and you were more comfortable taking the train than taking the plane between DC and New York City, or between Northern Virginia and New York City. So that kind of thing, and then going through the process of, okay, did that actually make a difference, is really important in everything, whether it's which pen I use or how I travel. And I think, Michelle, you also had an interesting experience with your action research on campus that might be pertinent as well.
Yeah, well, we did a survey basically and try to figure out how much our campus knew about renewable energy. And what we discovered is that we really didn't have the information that we needed to have about renewable energy in order to even get any kind of action research project going. So it actually, our action research project just turned into a survey to collect that information from the students. So hopefully future action research projects could actually be based on that research. So yeah, sometimes it's taking, one step at a time, and, feeling comfortable enough to be able to, kind of let go of that you're going to be the one to make the change, but you can also be the one to set up the change for someone else. So,
Yeah, and that was exactly my point, that here on a personal scale, you can be following things in action research, and then really looking across a community, across cohorts or generations. One group of students set some things up, and now Michelle's graduated, and other students here at Mason are taking up the charge of, okay, now how can we realize negawatts or energy efficiency, or how can we bring more renewable energy to campus? But they're using the baseline which her team put together a year ago to be able to explore and take the ball down the field.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels like kind of a letdown, like, oh, we didn't change anything on campus, but Dr. Dan tells me that I guess we did have some kind of an impact. So, all right, so that kind of leads me into the last actual question that I have written here, and it can be for all of you. So what's the smallest thing that we can all do to have the largest impact? You guys have already had a huge impact, so I mean...
I've been talking too much already today, but
I'll take it. All right. It seems
Someone's
that
gotta do it.
the buck has been passed. That was like a microcosm of our environmental movement right now. So let's see here. What's the smallest thing? It's a hard choice. You know, I could probably name 100 small things that someone can do. You know, one size green does not fit all. You know, if we're talking about just reducing your footprint, probably if you are live in your own home, whether you rent or own, one thing that'll help move the marketplace faster and reduce your footprint. I'm going to put a caveat in here because I feel like some of this is talking about passing the buck, but switching to green power in your house is one thing that you can do almost immediately. But that doesn't really, you know, let us off the hook for further reduction in our house. That's still just, you know, a renewable energy credit at its very core, and it's you're sort of buying your way out. But but what that does do is actually start sending. Again, we're voting with our dollars, right? It starts sending messages towards a lot of those, you know, public utility commissions that are making decisions on where the funding goes and where subsidies go. That we as consumers want green power out there, and I'll leave it at that. I mean, there's probably 100 other things.
all right, it took me a moment, and I agree. It took me a moment. I did think of one small action that we could all take that would help to make a difference, and that would be just go to someone you know who's not really thinking about this already, and just have a little talk with them, and not, you know, appreciating what we said earlier about realizing people coming from different perspectives, and maybe you're going to need to educate them a little bit, or try listening and hear where they're coming from, and then show them that you can appreciate that, and then move them towards appreciating your perspective. I remember I did my master's at the University of East Anglia, and I'm sitting on a double-decker bus on the double deck, and another student comes in and he sits down next to me, and you know, we decide to start talking because we're waiting for the bus to actually go somewhere, because British buses run later than other European public transportation, as I found out. And so I found out he was doing a PhD in international business management, and he really knew nothing about climate change. But of course, climate change was right in the title of my own degree, and so he took that as an opportunity to ask me about it. And we ended up having this really long conversation, and he came around to understanding, all right, maybe I need to actually think about this. And it was totally spontaneous. It can be spontaneous for any of us to do it, just be advocates out there, look for opportunities to do it, or we can specifically reach out to people. And that's the most powerful way of spreading an idea that there is. It's not big conferences and big presentations, it's who we know in our lives and the relationships we have with them. And if we can all leverage them, and then they leverage another person, then we're all moving much closer to the paradigm shift.
Oh, yeah? No. Sorry. Just like Tim, can I call you Tim?
By all means.
Okay. Just like Mr. Tim said, education. We talk to schools a lot, and we educate people about issues like global warming and climate change, same thing, and plastic pollution. And, sorry. And when we teach these kids go back and teach other people. And they start making a chain of different people they can teach. And when you're doing this, more and more people get aware of this and start making a difference. And so that's my number one message is education. Now, here it is.
Actually, I think, when the topic of, we're really talking about alternative solutions, right? And hope. And like, what are we looking at here is, we know that we have a lot of pressing issues and what's the smallest individual action. And we know that when we talk to each other, we start to respond. There was actually, interestingly enough, there was a study that came out a few weeks ago, and it came out of Yale. And it talked about how individuals in America will respond if asked by another peer to act upon climate change. I'm a big statistics and numbers guy, right? Like, I'm always sort of looking at the market numbers, and as far as hope goes, we have a tremendous amount of hope right now. There are, when let's look at the general economy, something like 2/3, almost 70% of the U.S. right now wants greener products available to them. We're talking, we're hitting as much as again, it's, after the sort of skepticism of 2009, we're back into a peak area where 80% of the country believes that global warming is a clear and present danger. The problem is we're looking at these numbers, and that shows us that there's a lot of optimism on the field. We just now need to figure out how to trigger that into some landslide movement. And when we're asking someone to act, I think it's sort of human nature to say, hey, can you do something? But we need to be very specific, measurable, actionable data when we're asking people to do something. Hey, would you reduce 1/3 from your carbon footprint? Hey, would you, send something? Would you sign this to your Senate? That's really, I think, what's missing. I really want to hammer home, it's these short-term common goals that are going to get us through. If we chain enough of these short-term common goals together, inside of a span of a few years, we'll navigate through this mess.
On that note, I think mine would be to continuously challenge yourself. And just some examples from my spring sustainability in action class, summer sustainability in action class, just over 5 weeks of students working on towards sustainability in their own personal lives, in addition to the example I gave with Dan. Stacy in my class tossed out about 36 pounds of food and yard waste into her family's compost each week once they decided to put a compost into place. Olivia switched gears from 100% driving to 80% biking in her daily activities, 105 miles per week on her bike, including Alexandria to George Mason and back every time we had a class, which was twice a week. That's right, twice a week. So she reduced her carbon footprint by 180 pounds per week. Maria dried out virtual water consumption by 5,000 gallons a week just by switching from eating meat at 8 servings a week to a 100% vegan diet for that 5 weeks. And just a couple more quickly here. Troy disposed of 75% of his family's weekly trash load by recycling and trashing less stuff. So it was just a matter of him thinking, hey, what if I think about this? And he suddenly found himself only producing 25% of the disposed wastes that he had before. And last two here, Richard switched over to reduce his electricity by lighting his home, unplugging his home electronics, and putting in some more efficient bulbs, and reduced his electricity by 31 kilowatt hours, 52%. And finally, Allie she was you'd call it a chain bottled drinker. She'd be drinking things out of a bottle and dropping it off. Her family didn't actually like her coming home because she filled up the recycling bin so quickly with her bottles. And she said, okay, I'm going to get one of those reusable bottles like most of you have here. And during the entire 5-week period, she said, I didn't take out my recycling the entire period of time. So she really had a transformation there. So everyone's going to have their own challenge to start with, but keep challenging yourself. I think is really the challenge too, or the easiest and simplest thing you could do. Okay, not easy and simple, but worthwhile doing.
Mindful decision.
Mindful, thank you.
Besides the biking one, that one was that's intense. That's more than a mindful decision. So those are all the questions that I have written for the panel. So I'm going to give the attention over to the audience if anyone has any questions to ask. We have about 15 minutes, I believe.
If we can get a mic on people, I have a hearing problem, so I might not hear the questions.
I'll repeat.
How about just not having, trying to make the temperature opposite the season? Like in the winter, I don't turn the heat on. It goes down to about 40. I can use an electric mattress pad. And I have long underwear, clothing. It's something that's been around for a long time. The Eskimos get about 40 degrees inside, and we can live at that temperature. They have babies inside at that temperature, and in the summer it can get warmer. You can paint your roof white, as our Nobel Physics Prize winning Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu said. And some people who have not won a Nobel Prize in physics also realize that white color roofs are not as hot. You don't have to have a Nobel Prize in physics to realize that. But nevertheless, our roofs are dark for historic reasons, because we didn't have light-colored surfaces of wood or tar or asphalt was used. But we can do things that are pretty, like turning off the heat or the air conditioning is pretty cheap, because it actually costs nothing. But painting your roof white, I reshingled a house one time that was black to white. Well, my neighbor we did it together with a neighbor in the row houses. My neighbor fell through on his side. He was heavier and he didn't have a tree to shade his roof. So the plywood was becoming delaminated and he
Yes. Do not fall through the roof.
Just as a kind of follow-up to, you're talking about voting with your dollars. So another benefit to that, so as we switch from fossil fuels to renewables, energy efficiency and renewable energy industry generate more jobs than fossil fuel industry. So as we switch away from fossil fuels, we're creating more jobs, and those jobs might even be in our community or even in our families.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that has a ripple effect, right? So even switching from Home Depot to Ace Hardware is a good, thing. I mean, that's really strengthening that local economy. Some of the work, I know, some of the work that the Going Green Today does, for example, with the District of Columbia, we've partnered with the Office of Planning, the Mayor, and the District Department of the Environment. They have their Sustainable DC plan. And what we've done is we've taken that Sustainable DC plan, which is a 20-year plan that the Mayor put into effect last year, and it's got hundreds of small metrics involved in it. And we've taken that and we've reverse engineered that, so that when someone signs up at dc.goinggreen today, which is the Do It for DC challenge, and they sign up and they answer a survey about their lifestyle, and the algorithms will then put together this person's fastest way to reduce 1/3 from their carbon footprint and give them one small action to do. Every action saves them a little bit of money and a little bit of carbon. We put the data together with a lot of the national players from Lawrence Laboratory, EPA, DOE, the ICLEI stuff, and so that there's a very strong metric. We know that the person in the District of Columbia has an average carbon footprint of 14.5 tons. And so if they clean the refrigerator coils today, they're going to be saving about 100 pounds of that off, and maybe like $9, $10 off their electric bill in the year. And so we challenge them to this 90-day plan, but inside of that 90-day plan, we've pulled them in for dollars. But what we're also doing is we're shifting their consumer patterns over quite heavily. And we're bringing them from, really average conventional products such as Clorox to, some fairly new solutions, low carbon intensive solutions. And it's really in that as much as that's a micro solution, when we start getting 11% of a defined region, we start hitting that tipping point, those numbers really start to add up. If 11% of the District of Columbia were to actually reduce, 1/3 of their carbon footprint, that's a 3.5% reduction of the total carbon footprint of DC. That's pretty significant. That's $134 million being put back into the local economy as they're learning how to consume differently and purchase differently. So there's. Okay, I'm done.
Death through hitting the grid by overuse. Old people that maybe have heat-related deaths, or children and old people that have breathing issues and that sort of thing. They may not all be government-related health cost issues, but these are cost issues that are impacting individuals or their deaths that are related, and whether they receive health care or not. These are costs to the government, to the people, and they are legitimate and should be considered. And I think a lot of times companies, the government, they don't consider these very legitimate costs when they look at pollution, the environment, and this is something that always really bothers me because they just look at, well, we don't want to follow EPA's guidelines, it's too cost prohibitive, and this type of thing, but they're not considering the overall costs over time, and I see it the same with the sustainability. With cost effectiveness, maybe they're just looking at the immediate short-term costs and not the long-term costs of life, health, and the ultimate long-term goals.
Yeah, again, optimism. They're starting to, right? That's a strong metric that what we're looking to do. And, on a municipal level or a state level, the idea of going and dropping $100 million into infrastructure to align with a lot of federal mandates that are coming down the line is a daunting fact. And to get them to start doing those sort of investments, we're absolutely, as the industry as a whole is absolutely figuring out the dollar signs attached to if we decrease traffic in the district, if we decrease traffic in a certain area by 10%, that will lead to a very quantifiable and measurable reduction in asthma attacks, in collisions, in fatalities. And there's some sort of controversial numbers coming out of, in the world right now that has a price tag to a human life, and what it costs. And so if and these are the numbers that are being looked at a little more closely these days, not just around decreasing mileage in asthma and public health benefits. That's how a lot of our funding is starting to be driven. Is a couple years ago, we got a federal number that on the cost of a ton of carbon. That's the social impact, and it's $35 is the social impact. I think $33 to $35. So these are all numbers that are starting to be looked at. We know that if we're looking at long-term, if we got to put long-term solutions in play, we need to look at it long-term like that.
Hey, Jake.
I'd like to go back, I guess, to Tim's remarks about about the discount rates. It seems to me, Tim, what you're saying is that there is an intergenerational issue here, and that the generation that is more the age of Louise's and OMG, they are going to pay the costs of a lot of the decisions that are being made today. And it seems to me that there are not very many places to even talk about these intergenerational issues. So I'm wondering if the panel has any ideas of how the kind of conversation that we've had today and we'll have tomorrow could be replicated in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. How could we begin having more conversation between older generations and young generations and talking about the costs that are being imposed on the younger generation? Anybody have any ideas about how that conversation could begin to take place?
Thank you, Jerry. Exactly, especially, may I call you Carter?
Yes, by all means.
Mr. Carter, no. Yes, you, even more so than I, will be bearing those costs in the future. And you should be aware of how we're treating that future you're going to experience in our decision making today. And fortunately, we have multiple generations represented here. And there's probably a lot of different places where we could start to promote that. I think a good kickoff point would be just drawing more attention to the discontinuity between our rhetoric about, yes, we care about the future, yes, we care about your future, that we hear and our politicians say it, who doesn't want to say that they support young people and future generations. But I think maybe we as the young people need to be pushing back more to say, we're actually not feeling that you're taking that into account. Can we talk about it? And it's going to take utilizing networks and bringing people together to make them more aware of this issue to even then feel that they need to discuss it. You can't have this intergenerational dialogue until people are aware that there's an intergenerational problem. And then you can move from there to talk about all of the different inclusive means that we would take to address it, which is going to be rethinking our economics, rethinking the real value of things, rethinking all of our individual actions and translating them into collective action. And I did want to reply to your point earlier that we do need to carefully balance, and this is why we would have this intergenerational dialogue, is we don't want to be hurting people in the present for the benefit of the future. But we do face this very serious trade-off we need to contemplate, because if we keep benefiting more and more people today in the same way that we're creating those benefits, then it is going to have very adverse impacts on people in the future. So we need to find a way through this intergenerational dialogue to balance the here and now and people who need to be taken care of and people who are living in poverty and that need to be allowed to increase their consumption to be able to have a decent life even, and those of us who need to then conserve resources so that you, Carter, and your future family possibly would be able to enjoy those things as well. So we would also want to define what's the objective of this intergenerational dialogue to go about it.
She does.
I love storytelling. I'm not going to tell a long story right now, but just to point out the idea of storytelling is really, I think, very, very important here. I hear my kids telling their friends of stories about sustainability-related things or issues or experiences. Or in my own case, I mentioned earlier the issue of student homelessness. I didn't even know this existed until our students found the stories and brought them into our classroom. And so bringing those stories about unsustainability and about alternatives to unsustainability into your daily lives, your conversations, your chats, your social media, your trips, And bringing back those experiences you have from elsewhere, I think really, really fundamental importance. In my own case, I spent 6 months in Senegal when I was junior in college, and I realized that the Senegalese were way more advanced than the United States with respect to resource efficiency, because when you have nothing, you use it very well. And when you have everything, you just throw it out. You know, I got 3 more bottles of water in the cabinet, kind of thing. So I think the idea of sharing your stories as you encounter them throughout your lives, the ones that tell meaningfully how to pursue a different world or what we're doing wrong in this world that could be changed, is really a key. Thank you.
All right, well, I think we are about out of time for this panel, but I want to thank you all so much for being here. Quite an inspiring panel. You give them a round of applause.